Boker Tov. Good morning.
Boker Tov.
Okay. See you again. Shalom.
Shalom. How are you feeling?
A little bit better. No, I'm still pretty congested, but we're getting there.
Yeah.
I got a cold when you were outside in the freezing cold, and the water pipe burst, and you were you stood in the water.
Yep. And the day before, I was standing in line for my shot, freezing. Anything's possible. Who knows?
Could be worse.
Yeah, a lot worse.
Yeah. So.
Yeah.
Could be
Yeah.
pneumonia. Could be pneumonia because it was cold outside.
Yeah.
Below freezing.
Yes, it was.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Well, I was so distraught over the mezuzah and the stuff with the mortgage company. I totally forgot I had yard site for my mother. Just,
You can
Well,
you can still observe. It's a symbolic behavior.
yeah. I even had the yard site candle out, but the mezuzah thing absolutely
Yeah.
threw me.
One of the things I've realized, with my mom's passing, was that if you realize how many days in the year you've got the yard site, you've got the English yard site, you've got the birthday, you've got 4 days of Yisker.
Enough already.
Right. So, there's days, and if you miss a day, so you know what? So, and if you observed it today, it would serve the same purpose.
Yeah.
No, it's not to mention Mother's Day. I mean, there's so many days in the course
So many
of the year.
days.
Right. It's a good thing, and yet it's also overwhelming in certain ways.
Yeah, well, you think about, just daily life
Right.
comes up frequently, things you want to know, and there's no one to tell you anymore.
Yeah, that for sure. I've reached the point. My mom's passed away, and my dad has got some kind of dementia. There's no asking. You can't ask him anything. So,
No.
Out of it.
I
there's
think,
no place to go.
why didn't I ask them these things? It drives me nuts.
Yeah, we all do that. Right.
Stuff you just never thought to
It worked that time.
ask.
There you go. Welcome.
Good morning.
Okay.
I actually had a question for you that I'll email Mark if I can.
Yeah, not about the class, about something else?
No.
Okay, yeah, please.
How are you feeling better?
There's still post-nasal drip, and I'm functional. I can't sing. 3 minutes into singing, I want to drown.
Yeah, it's not a good thing.
Yeah,
You look like you've rubbed your nose raw too.
I have.
Okay.
I went out this morning and bought 3 more boxes of tissues.
Oh, wow.
I read the Space City forecast, and it says it's a great day to be outdoors unless you're allergic to the things in the air.
Yeah,
Oh.
other than that. Yeah.
Yeah, I can tell this. I can wake up and then go outside and tell it's an allergy day because I wake up with.
It's time for the trees to be in bloom. This is the time that it happens.
Yeah.
Well,
Some of them were already in bloom, I noticed. But the little things are still on the trees, so maybe they'll
Exactly.
bloom. I don't know.
Boker Tov.
Okay,
Poke your toes, Cindy.
Boker Toe, how is everybody?
okay.
Hey,
Dale, how are you feeling?
Oh, me?
Yeah.
I'm better, but it's gonna take a number of weeks. It's pretty sore. I hope you don't get a cold, Joyce. Because you were cold last night.
Cold doesn't make you sick.
This is,
The movie made me sick.
Well, not being
Yeah,
able to see it, the beginning of the movie made it kind of meaningless.
well, right, we missed the whole thing that he was paying her.
I had no idea. You know what? I wrote to
No
Amy
idea.
this morning.
I thought they were just lovers. But
Well, and I wasn't even sure of that because I couldn't tell if it was the same person.
if it
and
was
one
the same guy, yeah, well, I figured it had to be since she was so shocked that he was married.
And since we were behind the screen, everything was backwards, so I couldn't see what Maya was looking at on the screen,
We couldn't either. We
which
couldn't
made the
either.
whole
No, it
movie.
was bad. It was bad. And
I
then
went and looked
it
it up at
kept
Wikipedia and it
replaying.
made more sense.
Yeah.
I just looked
Esther,
up what
how
the
are you
plot was.
feeling today? You feeling better?
The answer is yes. It's just, it's a constant postnasal drip. If I didn't have to, I'm a little miserable, but if I didn't have to sing, 3 minutes into singing, I've tried, I feel like I'm drowning.
Okay. We won't make you sing the lesson today.
You won't
There you
see
go.
next week.
Right.
A couple things, if I may, and Rhoda, if you remind me at the end as well, just to repeat. I'm not sure where the Tuesday makeup class came from, but I apologize if different information came out. I'm going to make it up with an extra Sunday going on, and I may even add one extra at the end. I've been working on one additional lesson if I can get there. So we'll go to the 21st and maybe even to the 28th is Pesach. 21st is where we're stopping. 21st is where we're stopping. Yeah.
Okay, so that Tuesday information in the Boker Tove is wrong?
I hadn't seen it and I apologize. Yeah, it is. I'll have to talk to Karen in the morning.
Okay.
All right. I thought there was some kind of other session for this Tuesday besides, but no, I'm not, because I know some of the people here may be working and some of the people who even may not be. I want to make sure I keep my Sunday so everybody who can attend can.
I appreciate that.
Yeah,
Thank you.
that's the goal.
Yeah, I have classes on Tuesdays.
Yeah. And, the Thursday crowd, they are used to the weekdays, but I realize there are people who can't do weekdays. So I'm just trying to be as open and flexible as I can.
Thank you. Thank you.
good. Good.
So I apologize for the misinformation. I'll follow up with Karen. And if Rhoda can just make a note at the end, I'll say it again for anybody else who pops in.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
I
enjoyed
apologize for
seeing you
putting
shake
you in
your
that
head
position.
no.
What's that, Sarah?
I said, I enjoyed watching you shake your head no while Rhoda was talking. I'm like, oh,
Because I didn't know where it came from. I was like, oh no.
Well, I was saying, anyhow,
Yeah, that's not Rhoda's fault.
no.
Well-
Oh, come on, blame me.
I know.
It's okay. I'm
no, it's not. I mean,
No,
it's
no,
not-
you're
it's
not-
part of my
no.
job description. That's okay.
Right.
There's
It was
enough on her plate. Let's not add. Right.
No,
okay. It was
no,
cleared with everyone but the teacher.
Right. Other than that, right.
Okay, and you have an international and West Coast audience in addition to the regular Brish Shalom
Right.
Houston area audience. So you're a very popular guy.
There you go. I think I just saw. Did I see Jerry on here too? From
Jerry's on. I did see him, but I don't. see
yeah,
him
from
now.
Northern California. So
Yeah,
we
San Francisco.
Diane and
Good
Dave, Northern
morning.
California. There we
Good
go.
morning.
Boker
Yeah,
Tov.
good.
wonder if his computer hung up like mine did coming in.
Yeah. So let me just share with you. I don't have internet problems usually. Last week, I just started my class and I found out somebody was working on the system, literally disconnected me. It took me 24 hours to get a worker back out to turn on my internet.
Oh, no.
So at least it wasn't my house. That was just, I've not had any internet problems before. It's just a bizarre moment. So I appreciate your patience with me. Give people another minute or two.
If you need a good computer guy, Hilton Nitson, who's a member of our synagogue.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
He's from South Africa originally. He's very good.
Oh, I'm gonna get his name. 'Cause
I'll make a note of it. Thank you. How do you know him, Sandy?
He worked for, for a few years, he lived down the street from us when he was a kid, but he worked for Data Doctors, which was owned by the Beasleys, and then they essentially dissolved the business, and he now does it on his own. He's very, very nice, very competent.
Awesome.
He learned his computer skills when he was living in Israel.
Nice,
Okay,
nice.
thank you.
Hey, Gina.
All
Hello.
right, good morning, everybody. It's good to see everybody back. I'm glad you didn't give up on me and just not show up again. I apologize for last week. Just a series of bizarre events, but we're glad everybody's back and we're going to play and we'll continue playing. And also, I'll let you know that I'm finishing up for next year. Next year, the course I'm going to probably teach is on American Jewish history. All
Oh,
right, so that's where we'll go. I'm almost finished. Another couple weeks. All right. So where we're picking up again, and I don't know who heard what, so I'm going to start from the very beginning. I apologize. I think it was just about 3 minutes, but of repetition. But hopefully, bear with me here. So World War I, as we know, was sparked by the assassination in Sarajevo on June 28th of 1914, a Bosnian Serb who belonged to an extremist nationalist group killed Archduke Ferdinand, the heir to the throne of Austria-Hungary, and this Austria-Hungary controlled much of Central Europe at the time. 2 months later, there's really World War, a war that lasts 4 years, stretches across 3 continents, and ultimately involved 30 different nations. You have one side, you've got the Central Powers, essentially Austria-Hungary, Germany, Ottoman Empire. On the other, the Allies, at that time, Serbia, Russia, France, and Britain. The US doesn't enter the war until about 2.5 years into the war. And more than 19 million people are killed, half of whom were civilians, okay? Every time something happens in Israel, it's always terrible to lose a civilian life, but it's not as if, well, gee, this is a new event. Unfortunately, war is disgusting, all right? And all sorts of terrible things happen. When people get engaged in a war, the search for enemies goes beyond just those outside the borders. They also start to search for enemies within, real and imagined. In the Ottoman Empire, those imaginary enemies were the Christian Armenians. In much of Eastern Europe, particularly Russia, we the Jews were the target. And nonetheless, with the outbreak of the war, almost immediately Jews enlisted in the defense of Mother Russia. Despite having enlisted, they're still seen as disloyal and suspected of being pro-German, even though 300,000 Jews fought in the Russian army. Early in the war, Russia wins control of much of the Austrian province of Galicia, but as the war progressed, the Germans prevail, and by October of 1914, the Germans control the northwestern part of Russian Poland and parts of Lithuania and Ukraine. But the Russians are retreating, and as they do so, they set fire to homes, farms, and businesses, and millions of people, Jews and Christians alike, are left homeless. During the war, a Jewish playwright and journalist who called himself S. Ansky traveled through the shtetls that dotted the pale of the settlement and Russian-controlled Galicia, and he reports, and Gail, you've got reading number 1.
At first, the slanderers did their work quietly and furtively, but soon they took off their masks and accused the Jews openly. From the generals down to the lowest ensign, the officers knew how the Tsar, his family, the general staff, and the commanders felt about Jews, so they worked to outdo one another in their anti-Semitism. The conscripts were less negative, but hearing the venom of their superiors and reading about Jewish treason day after day, They too came to suspect and hate Jews. Every commander, every colonel who made a mistake had found a way to justify his crime, his incompetence, his carelessness. He could make everything kosher by blaming his failures on a Jewish spy. The officers who accepted lies against Jews without question or investigation were quick to settle accounts with the accused. The persecution reached mammoth proportions. When the Russian army passed through many towns and villages, especially when there were Cossacks, bloody pogroms took place. The soldiers torched and demolished whole neighborhoods, looted the Jewish homes and shops, killed dozens of people for no reason, took revenge on the rest, inflicted the worst humiliation on them, raped women, injured children. A Russian officer talked about seeing Cossacks playing with a Jewish 2-year-old. One of them tossed the child aloft, and the others caught him on their swords. After that, it was easy to believe the German newspapers when they wrote that the Cossacks hacked off people's arms and legs and buried victims alive.
Okay. By late summer of 1915, the Russian army had uprooted more than 600,000 Jews. A non-Jewish deputy in Russia's parliament described their removal from the province of Rodom. Joyce, you've got square number 2.
The entire population was driven out within a few hours during the night. Old men, invalids, and paralytics had to be carried in people's arms because there were no vehicles. The police treated the Jewish refugees precisely like criminals. At one station, for instance, the Jewish Commission of Hamel was not even allowed to approach the trains to render aid to the refugees or to give them food and water. In one case, a train which was conveying the victims was completely sealed. When finally opened, most of the inmates were found half dead. 16 down with scarlet fever and 1 with typhus.
Soldiers who catch infants on their swords and police officers who force old men, invalids, and paralytics from their homes are not protecting their country from treason. Rather, they're seeing Jews as stereotypes and not as human beings. The Russian ministers, who see evidence everywhere of an international Jewish conspiracy, are not alone. There's a number of British, French, German, Austrian, and other European office officials who also routinely exaggerate the power of the Jews, particularly American Jews. Through 1915 and 1916, the US doesn't take sides in the war, despite efforts by both the Allies and the Central Powers to win American support. Both the Allies and the Central Powers believe American Jews could tip the decision by themselves. The question is, why are they so convinced that about 3 million Jews, most of whom are penniless immigrants in a nation of 88 million people, had such power? And that belief is based in part on the old myth that Jews control the wealth of the world. It's also influenced by the vigor with which Jews defend one another. Every time a group of Jews protested an injustice or helped a poverty-stricken Jewish community, some saw this as evidence of an international conspiracy. So every time an ADL, every time a federation reaches out and helps other Jews, it's often used as an excuse to show that Jews only care about themselves. The Ottoman Empire, which controlled Palestine and other parts of the Middle East, was an ally of Germany and Austria-Hungary. Early in the war, the Ottoman governor of Palestine feared that the Jewish nationalists there in Palestine would side with the Allies. And so he arrested some Jews, banished about 6,000 of the 85,000 Jewish settlers that were there. Many of them, interestingly enough, found refuge in British-controlled Egypt. All right. Almost every one of the governor deported, however, was a Russian Jew. So there was an element of the Russian piece of it as well. In his view, all Russian Jews were enemy aliens, even though many of them considered themselves refugees from Russian persecution. They had fled Russia, and yet they're still identified with them. He ordered that their newspapers, their schools, their banks, their political offices all close. When David Ben-Gurion and other Zionist leaders protested, they too were exiled. This policy persuaded some Zionists and Arab nationalists to help the Allies. You can see how that would play out. 1916, the British offered the Hashemites, a powerful Arab family was interested in creating an independent Arab kingdom. They offered that in exchange for the military support of the Arabs. Zionists, seeing this, are interested in a similar arrangement, wanting the British to recognize the rights of the Jewish people in Palestine. To show that they had their commitment to the Allies, a group of young Jews organized the Jewish Legion and fought on behalf of the British. November 2nd, 1917, Arthur James Balfour, the British Foreign Secretary, issued a declaration that stated in part, His Majesty's government view with favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people, and will use their best endeavors to facilitate the achievement of this object. Most of us have heard of at least this piece of it. To many anti-Semites, this Balfour Declaration, as it's become known, was proof that the Jews controlled Britain. To Balfour and other government leaders, it was a rational decision because they believed it would result in strong support for the Allies. Again, they're courting the American Jews. The Central Powers share the British government's view as the Jews as a united race. God, they should only know how ununited we are. You know, but from their words, that's the one thing, please God, they should be right about. All right, and therefore, they saw the Balfour Declaration as a powerful piece of propaganda for the Allies. And so what they do in response, they believe that this would prompt Jewish bankers to lend more money to the Allies and to minimize the effects the Ottoman officials end restrictions of Jewish immigration to Palestine. So there's this vying for the penniless, the support of the poverty-stricken American Jewish community, who's all standing there with their carts in the Lower East Side. By November 1917, a second revolution is underway in Russia. Not only has the Tsar been overthrown, but now the first democratic government has also been replaced as well. Russia's newest government, led by a communist group known as the Bolsheviks, officially withdraws from the war and signs a peace treaty with the Germans. All right, so Russia is stepping out of the war, controlled by the communists. Thanks to that treaty, Germany is able to transfer thousands of soldiers from the Eastern Front to the new battlefields in the West. But there they face a new opponent because the United States in April of 1917 declares war and signs on with the Allies. By the fall of that year, the American troops are helping the Allies push the Germans back. And it wasn't long until Germany surrendered and the war was finally over. World War I is coming to an end, and Jewish civilians find that in Eastern Europe find that the dangers they face are intensifying rather than diminishing. Russia, Austria-Hungary, and the Ottoman Empire are beginning to break apart, and dozens of ethnic groups are jockeying for power and independence. Revolutions, civil war break out almost everywhere, and the Jews once again find themselves caught in the middle. We're going to do a little bit of walking, going back to Russia. Lenin, the leader of the Bolsheviks, while agreeing with many of Marx's ideas, quickly realized that the real world doesn't always match Marx's theories. As soon as the communists take power, they find themselves at war with the White Army, those who made up mainly of Russians who hope to restore the deposed Tsar to power. So you've got the Red Army, the communists, still at war with the White Army, the supporters hoping to bring back the Tsar. They also found themselves the opposition from nationalist groups who wanted their own independent countries. So as a result, in some parts of the old Russian Empire, no one is in control. And that situation was particularly treacherous in the Ukraine, which housed the Pale of the Settlement. Like other ethnic groups in the old Russian Empire, the Ukrainians wanted independence, much like today. And as a result, the Red Army is not only facing the White Army, but also gangs of bandits and thugs and a newly organized Ukrainian army. These armies all targeted Jews in the belief that in so doing, they were attacking the Bolsheviks. To them, all Jews were communists and all communists were Jews. Why? Thank you, Karl Marx, who was a Jew. All right, so you've got the Red Army, you've got the Tsar's army who doesn't love the Jews, and you've got the Ukrainians who doesn't love the Jews. Everybody paints them into the other team's army, and so everyone in together is hating them. About 60 pogroms against Jews take place in the Ukraine in November and December of 1917, and attacks continue there for another 2 years, all by the Ukrainians. The White Army is also participating in pogroms in those territories under its control, and by late 1919, they've taken the lead in attacking Jews. John Ernest Hodgson, a British journalist who traveled with the White Army, explained why the White Army was attacking the Jews. Reading number 3, Sarah, you've got the next box. Come on down.
Okay, the officers and the men of the army laid practically all of the blame for their country's troubles on the Hebrew. They held that the whole catastrophe had been engineered by some great and mysterious secret society of international Jews who, in the pay and at the orders of Germany, had seized the psychological moment and snatched the reins of government.
Okay. These ideas, as he has described, except for the part about the German influence, come straight from the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. The Protocols had basically disappeared from view during the World War. But the brutal murder of Tsar Nicholas II, his wife Alexandra, and their children, at the hands of the Bolsheviks in July 1918, turned new attention to the document. A week after the killings, the White Army soldiers found a copy of the Protocols among Alexandra's possessions. They imagined this was a sign from Alexandra that the White Army was engaged in an epic battle against the evil Red Army controlled by the Jews. Historians, by the way, have found letters suggesting that Alexandra's copy of the Protocols was probably not a treasured possession, but rather a gift that she received before she was taken into custody. But the fact that the Tsarina owned a copy of the Protocols spread quickly throughout the White Army. Before long, many officers and ordinary soldiers were convinced that the fact that she carried the book with her was proof that it was true. And most of the men who served in the White Army probably believed it was true because it seemed to provide an explanation for the various terrible things that had happened to Russia over the past 10 years. And it had been a very difficult 10 years. So people looked for reasons. Statistics reveal that as a result of that fierce and unreasoned hate, more than 2,000 pogroms took place in Eastern Europe between 1917 and 1921. 75,000 Jews are killed, many more are injured, and at least 500,000 are left homeless. All right, walking shoes, Ottomans. The British and the French divided up the old Ottoman Empire, ignoring the promises that they had made both to the Arabs and the Jews. The British now controlled Palestine and Iraq. The French control Syria and Lebanon. In this process, however, the Zionists did make one important gain in that the text of the Balfour Declaration was included in the mandate that the League of Nations gave to Britain in Palestine over Arab objections. The League defined a mandate as a territory held in trust by a European nation until that nation gave the territory its independence. Nonetheless, anti-Semitism is alive and well in many countries. Let's take a look. Poland, newly formed Poland, where some 3.5 million Jews still live. Jews soon learned that they had merely passed from one kind of oppression to another. In their revived nationalistic fervor, the Poles looked on the unassimilated Jews as strangers and proceeded to strangle them, to squeeze them out of the national economy. 200,000 Romanians, former immigrants, were denationalized. Jewish educational and welfare activities were disallowed. Nativist groups attacked Jews everywhere with the complicity of the police. Post-war Hungary. This battered country fell into the clutches of a red dictatorship in 1918 under Bela Kun. Unfortunately, Bela Kun was a Jew, and he brought other Jews into his cabinet. And when that regime collapsed in 1919, a white terror under Admiral Horthy, Horthy, replaced it, and Jews suffered grievously. They were not allowed to forget that Kun was a Jew, and that anti-Semites missed no opportunity to be in the ear of the populace that Bolshevism was a Jewish invention. In 1919, some 5,000 Jews were slain in riots and massacres, and many more injured. The rest just simply humiliated and ostracized. With the communists now in power in Russia, as white Russians are fleeing the Soviet Union, they bring with them the protocols of the elders of Zion. To many of them, and to a growing number of people in other countries, once again, the protocols seem to explain the losses and the anxieties of the modern world. August 1921, the London Times exposes the protocols as a fraud. The newspaper shows how the original author of the document had copied fictional works to create the protocol. He took fictional works and built upon them. One of those works was an 1868 novel by Hermann Goethe, a German anti-Semite. That novel contains a chapter describing a secret meeting of the elders of Zion at midnight in the oldest Jewish cemetery in Prague. In this chapter of fiction, as the men gather to plot the enslavement of non-Jews, two Christians are hidden among the tombstones and eavesdrop. And one of them summarizes how the Jews intend to undermine Christian nations. Again, this is from the fictional work of Hermann Goethe in 1868. Rhoda, you've got the fifth square.
Okay. To concentrate.
Reading number 5, by the way, reading number 5, we're skipping 4.
Yeah. Concentrate in your hands all the capital of the nations of all lands, to secure possession of the land, railroads, mines, houses, to be at the head of all organizations, to occupy the highest government post, to paralyze commerce and industry everywhere, to seize the press, to direct legislation, public opinion, and national movements, and all for the purpose of subjugating all nations on earth to their power.
Okay, sorry. As a result of this expose, the publishing company stops publishing the protocols, and many newspapers no longer give it publicity. Neither action stops its popularity. A group known only as the Britons now publishes its own edition, and the preface claims that the Times expose proves nothing. Sandy, reading number 6. You're unmuted. Yeah.
Yeah, of course, Jews say the protocols are a forgery, but the Great War was no forgery. The fate of Russia is no forgery. And these were predicted by the learned elders as long ago as 1901. The Great War was no German war, it was a Jew war. It was plotted by Jews and was waged by Jewry on the stock exchanges of the world. The generals and admirals were all controlled by Jewry.
1922, translations of the protocols had appeared in Germany, France, and Poland. The Poland edition appeared at a time when many Poles, including leaders of the Roman Catholic Church in Poland, believed that the nation was about to be attacked by the Red Army. 2 cardinals, 2 archbishops, and 3 bishops, all influenced by the protocols, send out a cry for help that was read in churches around the world. It said in part, the real object of Bolshevism is world conquest. The race which has the leadership of Bolshevism in its hands had already in the past subjugated the whole world by means of gold and the banks. And now, driven by the everlasting imperialistic greed which flows in its veins, is already aiming at the final subjugation of the nations under the yoke of its rule. Translations of this document appear in Denmark, France, Greece, Hungary, Italy, Romania, Spain, and all over South America. White Russian exiles take it to Japan. Almost everywhere, these false statements contained in the book had seeped into the general culture. Exposés of the forgery seem to make little difference. After all, who can deny the wars, the revolutions, and the economic disasters that had taken place in the early 1900s? All had supposedly been prophesied in the protocols. So I want to take a few minutes here, and I know we've all heard of the protocols. We have a general sense of it. At the end of the readings, there's a section of the protocols, and I want to read through these so you have a little more of a concrete sense of what's really being said here. All right, and so we'll just start reading, and we'll everybody just read one section, and we'll keep switching. But you need to hear at least a little bit of what is really in the protocols. And so, Nomi, you've got the first. Across the border, so Nomi.
A fundamental belief of anti-Semites is that Jews have formed a secret government that is, at this very moment, conspiring to dominate the world. To support this bizarre assertion, anti-Semites cite the protocols of the learned elders of Zion, the canonical text in the history of conspiracy theory, which was forged by the Tsar's secret police in Paris. The forger concocted a tale of an alleged meeting of Jewish elders in the ancient Jewish cemetery of Prague, where in those eerie surroundings, they plotted to take over the world. After World War I, the work was taken very seriously, even by public figures, as it had been in 1905 by Tsar and the Kaiser, for it satisfied a deep emotional need in the post-war world, providing a simple, all-embracing explanation for a bewildering series of events. The fall of dynasties, the decline of aristocracy, bloody wars, national humiliation, the emergence of international communism, worthless currencies, the weakening hold of traditional religion, pornography, the new woman, jazz, and a host of other unsettling trends were each and every one to be accounted for as parts of a well-thought-out Jewish plan. In various versions of the protocols exhibit below, the anonymous narrator is reportedly the chief rabbi, Satan or Theodor Herzl.
Yeah, it's a good group to be in. There you go. All right, Diane, you got from protocol 1. No? Okay, not a problem. Lori, you've got reading number 1. Protocol 1.
The political has nothing in common with the moral. The ruler who is governed by the moral is not a skilled politician and is therefore unstable on his throne. He who wishes to rule must have recourse both to cunning and to make-believe. Great national qualities like frankness and honesty are vices in politics, for they bring down rulers from their thrones more effectively and more certainly than the most powerful enemy. Such qualities must be the attributes of the kingdoms of the Goyim, but we must in now wise be guided by them. For the sake of victory, we must keep to the program of violence and deception. The doctrine of vengeance is precisely the means by which we shall triumph and bring all governments into subjection to our super government. It is enough for them to know that we are merciless, for all disobedience will then cease.
All right. Lisa, reading 2 and 3. You need to unmute.
Protocol 2. The administrators whom we shall choose from among the public with strict regard to their capacities for service obedience will not be persons trained in the arts of government and will therefore easily become pawns in our game in the hands of men of learning and genius who will be their advisors, specialists bred and reared from early childhood to rule the affairs of the whole world. Protocol number 3. We appear on the scene as alleged saviors of the work from this oppression, poverty, when we propose to him to enter the ranks of our fighting forces, socials, anarchists, communists, to whom we always give support in accordance with an alleged brotherly rule of our social masonry. The aristocracy, which enjoyed by law the labor of the workers, was interested in seeing that the workers were well-fed, hungry, and strong. We are interested in just the opposite, in the diminution, the killing out of goyim. Our power is in the chronic shortness of food and physical weakness of the worker, because by all that this implies, he is made the slave of our will, and he will not find in his own authorities either strength or energy to set against our will. Hunger creates the right of capital to rule the workers.
Thank you. 5, Jeff.
For a time, perhaps, we might be successfully dealt with by a collation of the goyim of all the world. But from this danger, we are secured by the discord existing among them, whose roots are so deeply seated that they can never now be plucked up. We have set one against another the personal and national reckonings of the goyim, religious and race hatreds, which we have fostered into a huge growth in the course of the past 20 centuries. We are too strong. There is no evading our power. The nations cannot come to even an inconsiderable private agreement without our secretly having a hand in it. And it was said by the prophets that we were chosen by God himself to rule the whole earth. God has endowed us with genius that we might be equal to our task. All the machinery of all the states go by the force of the engine, which is in our hands, and that engine of the machinery of states is gold. The science of political economy was invented by our learned elders.
Thank you. Number 9, Sandra. So I'm going to assume if you don't have your picture up that you may or may not be there, and I'm not going to call on you because I don't want to embarrass anyone. So if you want to read, We need to see your picture. All right, Sandra, you're up.
Okay. Protocol 9. For us, there are no checks to limit the range of our activity. Our super government subsists in extra legal conditions, which are described rightly by the energetic and forcible word dictatorship. I am in a position to tell you with a clear conscience that at the proper time we, the lawgivers, shall execute judgment and sentence. We shall slay and we shall spare. We, as head of all our troops, are mounted on the steed of the leader. We rule by force of will because in our hands are the fragments of a once powerful part, the liberals, now vanquished by us. And the weapons in our hands are limitless ambitions, burning greediness, merciless vengeance, hatreds, and malice.
Keep going. One more.
Number 11, the Goyim are a flock of sheep, and we are their wolves. And you know what happens when the wolves get hold of the flock? God has granted us, his chosen people, the gift of the dispersion, and in this which appears in all eyes to be our weakness, has come forth all our strength, which has now brought us to the threshold of sovereignty over all the world.
Thank you. I see iPhone, but I can't see the picture. I don't know who that is. It's kind of dark. It says iPhone with your phone number. Okay, Gloria, you've got the next reading. Finish up. From the beach of, I know where your beach is, but from the beaches.
Beaches. Is that, which protocol was that now?
12 and 14.
Oh, 12 and 14. Literature and journalism are two of the most important educative forces, and therefore our government will become proprietor of the majority of the journals. This will put us in possession of a tremendous influence upon the public mind, thereby creating confidence in us and bringing over to us quite unsuspicious opponents who will thus fall into our trap and be rendered harmless. When we come into our kingdom, it will be undesirable for us that there should exist any other religion than ours of the one God, with whom our density is bound up by our position as the chosen people, and through whom our same destiny is united with the destinies of the world. We must therefore destroy all other religions.
Okay. I think we need to take a few minutes and comments about what have you heard here that may be different or even more intense than you anticipated.
It's amazing that we're so powerful.
Yeah, as I think Sandy told the joke, if only we were as powerful as our enemies described us.
Raise your hand.
Go ahead. Yes.
Yeah. The thing that came through loud and clear was they thought of every lie you could think of almost. They didn't miss anything.
Yeah, it's complete.
Yeah.
It's a manifesto that's been used for sure. Yep. Yeah.
For me, it was the intense hatred of the Goyim. This
right.
Over and over and over that anyone else was not worth anything.
Right. And just in case anybody thinks that when they use the term Goyim, it's not meant, it's not heard with all this kind of negativity, think again. Okay, Sandra?
Yeah, I think also that they included things like, that classically Jews have not been in charge of, except among their own small people, which is literature, the press, banks, and so it's really kind of an armed forces. I mean, how long has it been since Jews had armed, armies, right?
Right.
So it's really interesting that, they describe it as, where literature and journalism are the two most, that's true, the two most educative forces, right, to change people's minds that were literate. I mean, a lot of people weren't literate, the Cossacks and the people that were, butchering us. So, but this, and what also surprised me is I had read that some of this before, but it really stuck a long time. I mean, this was not just a flash in the pan, this Elders of Zion, right? It went through many decades. I mean, almost a century, that.
Well, as I'll talk about in a few minutes, it's still alive in the Arab world.
Yeah, yeah. But so this was so comprehensive. They covered almost every way that people could control other people.
Yep.
Except burning them in ovens in Auschwitz, so.
Okay, Gail?
Yeah, the steady drumbeat of lies. And the more you lie, the more people believe it. It may be irrational, but they still believe it, and that's the danger.
Yep. Sarah, and then Sandy, and then Rhoda.
It's kind of, some of the words came out that reminded me of a little bit of the prayer Elenu, but with misinterpretation of it.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
It is an example of a unfortunate, almost universal need to say it's not my fault, it's their fault. You have to find a scapegoat, and why reinvent the wheel when you can just drag out everything that has ever been said by anyone and exaggerate it and compile it so that it's just real easy. You don't have to hurt your brain a lot to think of this. You just will point it that direction. And the one that sort of, the number 14, which I don't know where it is in the book, but it's sort of like everything else they're going to destroy, and they're going to destroy your religion. That is almost the ultimate.
Yeah, if you remember back to the first reading we did today by Ansky, S. Ansky, one of the points he makes is every leader who makes a mistake, rather than has an easy out, it's the Jews' fault. Every mistake you make can be placed elsewhere. Rhoda, didn't know me. And then I'm sorry, iPhone, I don't know your name. You've got to put your name up.
It's Carolyn. It's Carolyn.
Ah, there you go. Thank you.
Okay.
Yes,
Sorry.
Rhoda.
Number 3, I mean, not only is there this lie about what Jews are going to do, it's a lie of what the past was like. It's sort of, it says, this sentence just hopped out at me. The aristocracy, which enjoyed by law the labor of the workers, was interested in seeing that the workers were well-fed, healthy, and strong. We are interested in just the opposite. We know that's not true, that the aristocracy was not interested in keeping workers strong and healthy and well-fed. That was absolutely not the case. So again, not only is it a big lie about what the Jews want to do, but it's going back and rewriting history in favor of what was.
Right. It's a distortion of historical fact. Absolutely.
Exactly.
No, all right, Nomi?
I have a question, actually. Was the original book, did it have illustrations in it? Because I've seen all sorts of graphics of like the Elders of Zion graphics, horrible things.
Sure.
That might be in modern versions, but I don't know if the original had.
Yeah, that's a very good question. I honestly don't know about the pictures. I haven't seen the document itself. It's not something I'm searching out, to be honest with you. I've seen the reports on it as I've given you. I don't know. It's a good question. Carolyn, and then we're going to go on.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I was just thinking, like, from, I guess, kind of a literary construction point of view, that the elders are speaking as themselves, and who would do that? I mean, and be credible to anybody in any way. Wouldn't you like say, oh, we're innocent, wonderful people, and they're so bad? But they're putting in the first person, plural, what they say and think. It just seems so unrealistic. I mean, so obviously made up.
Right. So if you remember the context of it was from a piece of fiction where somebody overhears them talking to one another.
Yeah, but I don't know. I just
yeah.
I mean, I know how effective it was. It just seems so I guess it's from a 21st century perspective. I just,
So
I-
if I put these words into the mouths, and just change it not to Jews, but if I put these words in, I'm sorry, no, about Jews, into the words of Hamas, the leaders of Hamas.
yeah,
Talking about, all right,
yeah.
could it
but
wouldn't
they would say, because and I think of the leaders of Hamas, they would say, oh, because we love Allah and Allah loves us, and this is the way it is. I don't know. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I'm not denying it. I know it's for real. It just seems so unrealistic that I can't believe anybody would believe it, but they do.
Clearly, they do.
Yeah.
So, all right, we're going to put on our bathing suits and swim across the ocean.
He got too cold.
You're frozen.
I wonder if AT&T is out again.
Maybe he has to come back in again.
Yeah, he's gone.
Oh, now I'm the host.
Yeah, Gail, you're now in the leader position, so why don't you carry on?
Why don't you carry on, Gail? Just have us read what is on the page.
Yeah, what page? What page are we on, Gail?
I have a feeling we're going to read number 7, New York Times, but I don't presume to know. He's probably going to come right back in.
I think we're on Henry Ford.
Henry Ford. Where's Henry Ford?
Henry Ford helped propagate that in the United States.
He, you know what he did? He took segments of the Protocols of Zion. He put it into a publication, and everyone who would buy a Ford car, he would put it on the dashboard.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
He also bought a newspaper so that he could expound upon this. He and I don't know to what extent Edison was involved in that, but he and his good buddy Edison were leading anti-Semites in the United States.
Thomas Edison?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Really?
It was the Dearborn Journal or something.
Yeah,
the Dearborn something. The Independent.
Dearborn Journal, yeah.
Thank you, Eric.
Also, there's a movie. It's a documentary. I'm sure. I think it's still. I may still be available on the film festival. This called Holy Silence.
Oh, it was
it's
one
more about the Catholic Church, but it also has a fair amount about Ford. Ford, and you see him with Edison, but they never mention Edison by name.
Yeah, Father Conklin, I think, is from Michigan.
Yeah, and he was in there too. Yeah, he has a big part in this documentary.
Yeah, I mean, it was an outstanding film.
I was just looking up. I remember there was somebody in last August, somebody who was there was somebody who was on the advisory council of the former president of the United States, who was pulled from a speech. She was about to give a speech, and she had retweeted something about Jews taking over the world.
Really?
Yeah. So it's kind of alive and well.
Oh, yeah.
Over.
Yeah, I mean, Hamas, I believe Hamas at least, uses the protocols. They're published in Gaza.
So does anyone want to mention any organization starting with the letter Q?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too. It's alive and well in Congress.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, it is kind of frightening that, when we read through this, some of the same rhetoric is being used today.
Also, the same methods about used to tar other people, other groups.
Our teacher's back.
Yeah.
I am so sorry. The one disadvantage, I'm not sure why, but I switched my cell phone, and the disadvantage with the cell phone is I only see one person at a time, so I'm not sure who's here anymore. But I'm going to continue teaching nonetheless. Okay.
We're all here.
All right. My apologies. I'm not sure what just happened, but I know I'm getting frustrated with the internet world. All right. So 1918, Ford buys his hometown newspaper. And a year and a half later, he begins publishing a series of articles that claim that there is a vast Jewish conspiracy that is infecting America. And it runs in a continuous 91 consecutive issues. Ford bound these articles into 4 volumes, and he titles them The International Jew. And he distributes 500,000 copies through his dealerships. It's not that the rhetoric is unusual here, it's its scope. So what kinds of things does Henry Ford blame on the Jews? America, everything in the world that can possibly happen. Strikes, the Jews are at fault. Financial scandal, the Jews are at fault. Agricultural depression, the Jews are at fault. In a way, the Jew becomes the symbol of a world that is being manipulated and controlled. And as one of the most famous men in America, he legitimizes these ideas. As a matter of fact, at the Nuremberg trials centuries later, Germans credited Ford's International Jew as a source of their anti-Semitism. They had looked, following the war, when Germany fell into poverty, they looked to wealthy Americans. This is after World War I. They looked to wealthy Americans for advice, and Ford was one of those that fed the anti-Semitism of Nazi Germany. What separates Ford from other people during this time is that there are obviously lots of small town newspapers. It's that he also owned the Ford Motorship dealerships. He would have stacks of them. And again, it's not as if you have 35 different car dealerships like you do today. There were very few around. So people were buying cars. You'd walk into the dealership wherever it was in the country, and there would be stacks of this. In some places, the dealership would put copies of the newspaper in your car when you bought it. So as you drove away in your brand new vehicle, there it was seated next to you. Any attempt to show that the protocols was a forgery was completely rejected by Ford. All right. And so what happened is some Jews began to boycott the purchasing of Ford. I grew up with this with German cars. You know, you didn't buy a German car. I learned that early in my life. But very few Jewish American leaders supported the boycott. Instead, they created a public relations campaign to educate Americans about Jews and Judaism. 119 prominent Americans, including President Woodrow Wilson, former President William Taft, signed a letter in 1921 condemning anti-Semitism, saying, "We believe it should not be left to men and women of the Jewish faith to fight this evil, but that it is in a very special sense the duty of citizens who are not Jews by ancestry or faith." But nothing seemed to affect the popularity of the protocols or Ford's newspapers. 3 years later, in 1924, the Dearborn Independent ran a series of articles attacking a Chicago lawyer by the name of Aaron Sapiro, S-A-P-I-R-O. It focused on Sapiro as being part of a conspiracy of Jewish bankers who sought to control the food market of the world. Sapiro hired his own team of lawyers who filed a $1 million defamation lawsuit against Ford. Now, you know what $1 million is worth in 1924, an awful lot of money. Ford hires a team of lawyers and an army of detectives to defend himself. But the first trial ends in a mistrial after a reporter interviews a juror before the case was decided. At the second trial, it became increasingly clear that Ford was going to lose because he had no proof of his charges against Shapiro. And at this point, Ford contacts Lewis Marshall and U.S. Congressman Nathan Perlman. And he tells them that he had been wrong. He'd been wrong to attack Shapiro and the other Jews who want to make, and he wants to make amends. The two men suggest a public apology and an end to Ford's anti-Semitic campaign. And Ford agrees, and he commissions Lewis Marshall to write his apology. Many people consider this the first hate speech case. Whatever Ford says at this point, nonetheless, his works lived on. There were 5 anti-Semitic organizations in the US before 1932. 8 years later, there were 120 such groups. Many of them relied on the articles and books Ford had published in the 1920s to support their attacks on the Jews. Among the anti-Semites who acknowledged their debt to Ford was Father Charles Coughlin, a Detroit-based Catholic priest, who had an early weekly radio show that would have made Rush Limbaugh jealous. He had 30 million listeners on a weekly basis. Coughlin wrote the following: "Yes, the Jews have always claimed that the protocols were forgeries, but I prefer the words of Henry Ford, who said, 'The best test of the truth of the protocols is the fact that up to the present minute, they have been carried out.' Mr. Ford did retract his accusations against the Jews, but neither Mr. Ford nor I retract the statement that many of the events predicted in the protocols have come to pass. Those predicted events included World War I, the Russian Revolution, and the Balfour Declaration." Now, these events were not actually predicted in the protocols, but the document uses such a vague language. Think of a horoscope. You want to see it? Yes, see it, plain and simply. Just as an aside, this preacher, Karl Coughlin, later defended the German-sponsored events of Kristallnacht, all right, as an arguing that the actions of the Germans were justified as retaliation for Jewish persecution of Christians. All right, a little bit back to Ford. Despite his claims to be rid of anti-Semitism, by 1939, there were signs that appeared on the parking lots and gates of the Ford Rouge River plants that said the following: "Jews teach communism. Jews teach atheism. Jews destroy Christianity. Jews control the press. Jews produce filthy movies. Jews control money." Ford continues to claim that the Jews fomented the First World War so that they could profit from supplying war materials to both sides. And he actually blamed the Jews for starting the Second World War, saying the whole thing has just been made up by Jewish bankers. Now I want to walk across time. Jumping ahead, the protocols have surfaced again and again, fueling hatred of Jews in every period of social and political turmoil. A century after it was written, the Protocols is being peddled to an audience vaster than any of its authors could ever have hoped for. It is staged on television productions for millions of viewers in the Arab world. It is sold in Europe in bookstores of both the radical left and the radical right. It is circulated on the internet in practically every language there is. It is hawked on street corners of America by Black Muslim followers of Farrakhan. And it is excerpted and distributed by anti-Zionists on college campuses across the world, across the country. So this is where I want to stop. And again, I can't see anybody, but I will take a few comments at this point. But I can't see anyone, and so I have to sort of ask people to take turns to the best of your ability.
Remind you to mention that there won't be a Tuesday class, but there'll be.
Thank you. Yes. So there is apologies on the confusion of our marketing. We're not making up the class this Tuesday. We'll continue on Sundays for a few weeks. Okay. And so we'll be meeting next week and the following Sunday through the 21st, and I'll make up the extra class on the 21st. Thank you, Rhoda. Any other thoughts or comments?
And in the film Holy Silence, which was shown at the Jewish Film Festival this past week, Hitler, it was mentioned that Hitler at his rallies would mention Father Coughlin and implored the Catholic Church, the Vatican, to follow his leanings.
Right. Right. And you've also got Charles Lindbergh flying around the same kind of thing. And he's actually awarded a Medal of Honor by Germany. Yep. Anyone else? All right. Not being able to see and hearing none, I want to wish everybody a good week. Please stay healthy. We'll play again next week. I apologize for all the internet stuff. I'm not sure what's going on. I may figure I need to go to the synagogue next week for the class and teach it
Mark,
from there.
are we having class on Thursday? No.
Yes. We'll have
Yeah.
class this Thursday, next Sunday, the following Thursday, and then one more Sunday.
Okay.
Okay?
Thursday is the same as this.
Thank you.
Well, Thursday will be the same as next Sunday's.
He heard you.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Bye-bye, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thursday.